For 10 years on JAG, these officers chased the truth in a courtroom. The truth about their own lives proved stranger than any case. One of them built a Hollywood career on a lie that only unraveled at his own funeral. Another walked away from fame 3 separate times. 2 are gone now. Here is where all of them landed. We begin with the face the show was built on. Long before he ever wore a naval officer's uniform, David James Elliott walked away from his own high school diploma to chase a wilder dream, fronting a rock band in small Ontario clubs. He came back at 19 to finish school, auditioned his way into the Stratford Shakespearean Festival's Young Company for 2 years, and only then drifted toward acting under a stage name he adopted after discovering another David Smith already working. Audiences knew him as Harmon Rabb Junior, the aviator grounded by night blindness who traded the cockpit for a courtroom. The romance that shaped his life moved slower than any plot the writers gave him. He met a Canadian actress named Nancy Chambers in the late 1980s, then lost her to distance when he chased work in Los Angeles and she stayed behind in Toronto. Worn down by the miles between them, he simply showed up on her doorstep one day and asked her to come build a life with him. They married at Los Angeles City Hall in 1992, with almost nothing to their name, a ceremony so plain that 7 years later they held the wedding all over again in Santa Barbara, their young daughter walking down the aisle as Flower Girl. Chambers later joined him on the series as the sharp-edged Lieutenant Lauren Singer, making them one of the rare Hollywood couples who shared the same call sheet. More than 3 decades on, that marriage still holds, along with the 2 children it gave them, Stephanie and Wyatt. His career proved just as durable. Where most leads of a 10-year hit fade once the cameras stop, Elliott kept landing top billing, a wrestling patriarch in heels and a small-town sheriff in the 2025 series Revival, and he even slipped back into Harm's old uniform for a return on NCIS Los Angeles. Away from the set, he has run the Boston Marathon to raise money for youth programs, an echo of the steady decency he gave his most famous character. He turned 65 in the autumn of 2025 and still works steadily out of Los Angeles, the rare star who outlived his signature role without ever resenting it. Harmon Rabb was the unshakable officer who always found true north. David James Elliott was the Canadian dropout who wanted to be a rock star, gambled everything on a woman in another city, and built a marriage that has lasted longer than most careers. Our second story belongs to a woman who almost never made it onto the show at all. Catherine Bell first appeared on JAG in a tiny 3-line part, a role killed off and forgotten, and by every normal rule of television that should have been the end of her time there. She refused to accept it. Sitting down with nothing to lose, she wrote a letter directly to the show's creator, Donald Bellisario, asking him to build a lead character for her, and against every odd, the plan worked. She played Sarah MacKenzie, the Iron Marine lawyer who stood as Harm's equal across 9 seasons. The grit behind that letter was forged early. Born in London to a Scottish architect father and an Iranian mother, she was 2 years old when her parents divorced, and she grew up in the San Fernando Valley raised by her mother and Iranian grandparents, speaking Persian at the dinner table. She studied biology at UCLA, dropped out to model in Japan, worked for a time as a masseuse, and stood in as a body double before her own face ever carried a scene. Writers eventually folded her heritage into the character, letting MacKenzie speak Persian on screen, a quiet nod to the girl from the valley. Her personal life carried its own turns. She married a production assistant named Adam Beeson in 1994, had a daughter and a son with him, and separated in 2011 after the family sold their California home. In the years that followed, she relocated toward Clearwater, Florida, and built a life largely out of the public eye. A practicing Scientologist who has spoken openly about reaching the state the church calls clear, she once used a writer's strike to teach herself to fly a small plane. Once the series ended, she became one of television's busiest leading women all over again, anchoring Army Wives for 6 seasons and then carrying Hallmark's Good Witch films and series for more than a decade as Cassie Nightingale, stepping behind the camera as a producer along the way. She is 57 now and still working. Sarah MacKenzie was handed her authority by the United States Marine Corps. Catherine Bell earned hers with a single letter that talked a producer into inventing a starring role from nothing. Years before JAG, She had first met the next name on this list while both were burning with fever on a film set in Thailand, and his story ends in a secret no one saw coming. The accent was a lie. Every detail of the boxing-scarred Australian ex-convict who clawed his way to Hollywood was invented, and the fans never knew it, and neither, astonishingly, did the industry that hired him. Trevor Goddard played Mick Brumby, the cocky Australian naval officer who circled Mac as Harm's rival and her near husband. His real story was almost ordinary by comparison. Born in Croydon, in South London, he was an English boy who drummed in punk bands as a teenager and boxed as a light heavyweight before sailing to America to act. He was discovered during a boxing match, drifted through beer commercials and small parts, and then turned the villain Kano in Mortal Kombat into a figure the video game itself later copied. Auditions had gone nowhere while he presented himself as an Englishman, so he reinvented himself wholesale, inventing a birthplace in Perth and a hard-luck criminal past, and the new identity worked so well that he beat actual Australians to Australian roles, once even winning the job of voicing a kangaroo over a line of genuine Australian actors. The press believed him. His own publicist believed him. He carried the fiction onto JAG and held it for years without a single crack. The ending came fast and cruel. In June of 2003, in the middle of a divorce and a custody fight over his two young sons, Travis and Daniel, Goddard was found dead in his North Hollywood home at the age of 40. An autopsy found a lethal mix of heroin, cocaine, and prescription drugs, and though suicide was suspected at first, the coroner ruled the death accidental. His girlfriend was the one who found him. A small pirate role in Pirates of the Caribbean, his final film, reached theaters about a month after he died, and the Associated Press still called him Australian in its first reports of his passing. 16 days after his death, more than 400 people filled a memorial in Hollywood, and there, standing over his son's coffin, Goddard's father, a retired London police inspector, finally told the room the truth. The Australian story was invented. Underneath it had always been an Englishman who spent his entire career making the world believe otherwise. Cremation followed, and his ashes were given to his family. No headstone marks him, no cemetery holds him, only the people who loved him and the secret his father set free at the very end. Mike Brumby was the swaggering outsider who finally won the audience over. Trevor Goddard was a London gardener's son who built a second self so convincing that the lie outlived the man, and it took a grieving father to say the truth out loud. Here is the question that has stayed with us. Did anyone on that set ever know the real Trevor Goddard? Or did the performance never once stop? If you have a thought, leave it in the comments below. Halfway into our roster sits a man whose life began with a label no child should carry. Social workers called the malnourished, terrified infant unadoptable. And at 9 months old, Patrick Labyorteaux was taken in anyway by a Hollywood talent agent and an actress who refused that verdict. They gave him a home, a name, and 2 adopted siblings, a brother and a sister rescued the same way, and the boy who could not keep food down grew into a working child star. He played Bud Roberts, the eager junior officer who grew from comic relief into the warm heart of the series. Long before the Navy uniform, he was a fixture of American living rooms. From 1977, he played Andy Garvey on Little House on the Prairie, sharing the screen with his adopted brother Matthew, who played Albert Ingalls. The roles kept coming through the 80s, Heathers and Summer School among them, the second of those alongside a young Mark Harmon who would one day anchor NCIS. Near the end of JAG, the writers had Bud lose a leg to a landmine, and the recovery scenes played so convincingly that some viewers wondered whether the actor had truly lost it. Then JAG handed him something stranger than fiction. Bud's life on the show kept echoing his own a year behind, as he liked to tell it, because the character married, and a year later Labyorteaux married the show's producer, Tina Albanese, after the two quietly dated on set. Writers gave Bud a baby, and soon after his own wife was expecting their son, Joe, born in 2001. The pair later created a television series together and stayed partners in work as well as life. His proudest credit never aired. Together with his brother, Labyorteaux founded a charity for runaway children and testified before a House subcommittee, helping raise $11 million for youth shelters across the country, a cause rooted plainly in his own rescued beginning, The kind of work that plainly mattered to him more than any part he ever played. He is 60 now, still acting and lending his voice to animation, and still close enough to his old castmates to host them on his podcast. Bud Roberts was the gentle soul who made the whole office feel like family. Patrick Labyorteaux was the baby a system gave up on, raised by people who saw a son where others saw a lost cause, and he spent his life paying that rescue forward. The fifth face answered to Admiral on screen, yet long before that he answered to a far humbler title. Before John M. Jackson ever barked an order in a JAG courtroom, he stood at a chalkboard in Austin, Texas, teaching social studies to high school students, and he did not start acting in earnest until his late 20s. He played Rear Admiral A.J. Chegwidden, the gruff former Navy SEAL who ran the office with hidden warmth. His road to the screen ran through ordinary American rooms. Raised in Fort Worth, a high school football and basketball player who went on to the University of Texas, Jackson taught for a living before chasing a community theater spark all the way to New York and then Hollywood, where small parts on shows like Wise Guy slowly built a career. A small bureaucratic wrinkle even shaped his name, because the Screen Actors Guild already had a John Jackson on its rolls, forcing him to add the middle initial that fans would come to know. One earlier credit makes the JAG role almost uncanny. 3 years before the series, Jackson played a senior JAG officer in the film A Few Good Men, the courtroom drama that helped inspire the show itself, so that by the time he pinned on Chegwidden's stars, he had already worn that world twice over. The uniform fit him so naturally that strangers often assumed he had served, though his only real command had been a roomful of Texas teenagers. Of his private life, almost nothing is public, and that silence is worth respecting rather than filling. In an industry that documents every marriage and every child, Jackson has kept his own family entirely to himself, leaving no reliable public record at all, and there is a quiet dignity in a man who gave audiences a character for 9 seasons and held the rest back. He is 75 now, having reprised Chegwidden as a guest on both NCIS and NCIS Los Angeles, and taken a recurring role on Bones. Admiral Chegwidden was the stern father figure every young officer wanted to impress. John M. Jackson was a Texas school teacher who found acting late, played the same Navy lawyer across 4 different shows, and guarded his real life so well that the world never got to know it. The 6th name belongs to a woman the network simply erased between seasons, and she never even got an explanation. She did nothing wrong, and the people in charge erased her anyway. Tracey Needham spent the entire first season of JAG as Harm's partner, then watched from the outside as a change of network swept her character out of existence without so much as a written goodbye. She played Meg Austin, the sharp Navy lawyer and computer weapons expert who stood at Harm's side through that first year. What happened behind her exit is a study in how little control an actor holds. Born in Dallas and raised partly in Denver, she had been the only girl among 4 children, so tall by the 8th grade that a high school theater director told her she belonged on the technical crew rather than the stage, and she had already played the older sister Paige on Life Goes On before JAG found her. The original pilot had given Harm a different partner entirely, played by Andrea Parker, but executives disliked the pairing and pushed the creator to hire Needham instead. By her own account, the creator never wanted her, was overheard dismissing her as the blonde the network forced on him, and quietly wished for the first actress back. When NBC canceled the show and CBS revived it, the slate was wiped clean, her character was dropped, and a new leading woman was brought in to replace her, leaving a hole that confused loyal viewers for years. There were no public tantrums about any of it. Needham had married the actor Tommy Hinckley in 1995, then a few years later welcomed a daughter, Katie, and when she looked back on the whole affair in later interviews, she framed her step away from the spotlight as a deliberate choice to be present for her family rather than claw for advancement. She went on to lead another series, The Division, for 3 seasons before easing out of the chase on her own terms. Her career did not collapse, but the wound was real, because being written off has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with rooms an actor never gets to enter. She is 59 now, long since at peace with a chapter she did not get to author. Meg Austin was the principled partner fans never stopped missing. Tracey Needham was the actress caught in a tug-of-war between a network and a showrunner, swept off a series she had done nothing to lose, And she answered the unfairness by walking quietly toward a life she actually wanted. If these are the stories you came here for, the ones no other channel bothers to dig up, take a second to subscribe before the next name, because it belongs to one of the most accomplished actors ever to pass through this show. He quit Hollywood 3 separate times, and 3 separate times it came looking for him. Dean Stockwell was a child star of the 1940s who openly hated the work, a boy who said the constant filming was a miserable way to grow up. And as a man, he kept walking away, first as a teenager, again in the freewheeling 1960s, and again in the 1980s to sell real estate in New Mexico. For a handful of episodes near the end of JAG, he played Secretary of the Navy Edward Sheffield, the politically pointed civilian who leaned hard on the office. Performing ran in his blood from the start. His father was the singing voice of the prince in Disney's Snow White. His older brother became an actor too, and young Dean was signed to MGM and put to work before most children start school, appearing opposite Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly in Anchors Aweigh, at just 9 years old and earning notice in Gentleman's Agreement and The Boy with Green Hair. Awards arrived even then, and kept coming across 70 years. 2 Best Actor prizes at Cannes, a Golden Globe nomination, and an Academy Award nomination for playing a comic mob boss in Married to the Mob. Each time he fled the business, it pulled him back richer. His escape to New Mexico in the 80s ended the moment Paris, Texas, and Dune, and then Blue Velvet handed him what he called a third career. He had already spent 5 seasons as the cigar-smoking hologram, Al, beside Scott Bakula on the time travel series Quantum Leap, the role that made him famous to a whole new generation and brought him 4 Emmy nominations, and he later turned sinister as a recurring figure on Battlestar Galactica. Through all of it, he was a married man, wedded to a textiles expert named Joy in 1981, the father of a son and a daughter, Austin and Sophia, and in his final years he poured himself into collage and sculpture under his full name, Robert Dean Stockwell. The last chapter took him far from any soundstage. After a stroke in the middle of the last decade, Stockwell retired from acting and moved to be near family, and he died of natural causes on the 7th of November, 2021 at 85 in Whangarei, New Zealand, where his daughter had built her home, his wife at his side. Cremation followed, and his ashes were given to his family, carried home rather than committed to any single plot of ground. Edward Sheffield was the Washington power broker who treated the Navy as a chessboard. Dean Stockwell was a reluctant child star who ran from fame 3 times, gathered an Oscar nomination and 2 Cannes crowns anyway, and ended his long road in a quiet town at the bottom of the world. Our final name kept wearing a version of the uniform long after the cameras stopped, and she carried it into places far more dangerous than a soundstage. When JAG ended, Karri Turner turned her energy toward the real military, boarding transport planes for more than a dozen tours to entertain deployed American troops, including a trip into Iraq with the comedian Kathy Griffin. She played Harriet Sims, the sunny office sweetheart who married Bud and grew up alongside him across the years. Her path to the show ran through comedy and the stage. Raised in Arkansas by a high school math teacher father and a theater actress mother, she trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and sharpened her timing with the famous improv troupe The Groundlings before television found her. She voiced the Kathy Lee Gifford character on South Park and turned up in films like Get Smart. But on JAG, she became the emotional center of the office, her on-screen marriage to Bud unfolding into one of the warmest threads the show ever followed. Away from the camera, she has guarded her life with unusual care. The public record cannot even agree on whether she married or had children, with sources flatly contradicting one another. And rather than guess at a woman who has clearly chosen privacy, the honest answer is that she has never felt the need to settle the question for strangers. What she has made public instead is her devotion to service members, tour after tour, year after year, by some counts more than a dozen and by others closer to 18. That devotion became her second calling. Alongside the USO trips, she worked with groups such as Stars for Stripes and the American Freedom Foundation, treating the salute she once faked for a camera as something to honor for real, and she returned briefly to acting with a 2020 appearance on NCIS. She is 59 now, still meeting fans and still proud of the miles she logged for the troops. Harriet Sims was the tender heart who held the JAG family together. Karri Turner was the actress who took a fictional commitment to the armed forces and made it genuine, flying toward the very wars her old show only ever staged. Two of them are only ashes now, one kept by family in California, one carried to New Zealand, and the rest are scattered across a country the show never visited.